What do we mean when we talk about the truth? What is the truth? How can we get hold of it? Is the truth knowable? And are there criteria to distinguish truth from false knowledge? These are the questions that humanity has wrestled with for ages, and I would like today to outline the main questions involved in the discovery of the truth. Hello and peace, I am Louay Safi, and this talk is the first in a series focusing on issues of truth and power, and practically these two concepts really cover a lot of what we talk about and do. Now, the first thing we realize when we examine the meaning of the word truth is that it is a complex concept. We can easily distinguish four layers of meaning, or if you will, four types of truth: empirical truth, transcendental truth, subjective truth, and objective truth. Let us take them one by one and explore the separate shades of meaning that they have. Now, first, empirical truth versus transcendental truth. Empirical truth involves statements we make about physical objects around us. They describe the world of phenomena, the world that we see and touch and live in, and we can examine through our senses, or through some rational argument that is grounded in the data we receive from the senses. They can be ascertained, those kind of truth, empirical truth, they can be ascertained by either experimentation or critical examination. We could look rationally, critically using the different methods of logic that we have to understand the reality around us. Transcendental truth, on the other hand, involves statements we make about things we cannot comprehend through our senses. Take, for instance, the statement regarding the person and nature of Jesus Christ. Is Jesus a historical person? Well, the question is clearly open to rational examination. Now, is Jesus coeval with God? This is a claim about transcendental truth that cannot be demonstrated by any rational argument or by material evidence. The claim relies completely on the biblical account. Those who affirm the divinity of Jesus do that because they believe that the Gospels are the Word of God. Those who deny it, on the other hand, deny the divinity of Jesus, point to issues of authenticity and interpretation. For example, they argue that the explicit claim of divinity of Jesus can be found in the Gospel of John, a gospel that appeared 100 years after Christ, and it provides really accounts that are not in line with the other three Gospels, the Gospel of Mark, Matthew, and Luke. And so here is a question that is open to argument and contestation because there is no direct way to ascertain the truth that is made in that statement. And in fact, the most important questions that we care about, question about the origin of life, the meaning of life, the destiny of humanity, these are transcendental questions, questions of transcendental truth. And by that, I mean that they are part of the metaphysical world, the world that is beyond our senses and beyond our direct observations. Questions like what lies behind the material world? Is the world created? And if so, who created it and how? Is there a purpose to life? And if there is a purpose, what is that purpose? Now, if you go back and look at the Greek philosophers, they, in fact, argued that through logic they can find God, they can discover God, they can, in fact, decide who God is. And they did. In fact, they argued that God is the first cause, is the first mover, and God is a pure reason. This was a statement of logic, supposedly, that they discovered it through deduction and through argumentation. They argued also that God really is way above humanity, and he is above the petty concerns of a human being, and therefore he's not involved in the world. Now, monotheistic prophets, and in fact scholars and priests, for example, Muslim philosophers and theologians have argued that God is the source of the universe, and developed some proofs, including the design proof of God. Of course, the proof that it was used by the Greek philosophers is the proof of the first cause, that God is the first cause, because God is absolute, and without an absolute being, then we cannot talk about the universe. But as we saw, God to the Greek was a distant God, an aloof God. And of course, this is exactly what some modern deists believe. They believe in God, but they believe that God above our own concerns, and we are left to our own tools and means to take care of the world we live in. Now, for that reason, we find, for example, the many monotheistic scholars and people of religion did not like Greek philosophy that much, because within monotheistic tradition, God is engaged in the world, is not aloof. And that, led to the work of an important Muslim philosopher with the name of Al-Ghazali, who looked through the Greek philosophy and concluded that this philosophy is based on speculation, and all the information it provides are lacking certainty and good grounding. In fact, Ibn Khaldun, a few centuries later, tried to explain why we cannot make any firm statement about metaphysical reality, because he argued that those categories, those concepts we use to judge metaphysical reality are derived from our own physical reality. So they are an abstraction of our own experience. And therefore, they are lacking the correspondence. There is no correspondence between those concepts and the metaphysical reality, because metaphysical reality cannot be really accessed through our reasoning. There are no data that coming directly through the senses that we can examine. And therefore, Muslim philosophers concluded that metaphysics is beyond the ability of human rational reasoning to access. And interestingly, of course, we know that modern philosophy came to the same conclusion. For example, Immanuel Kant demonstrated in his the Critique of Pure Reason that reason can only ascertain the physical world, statements about the physical world. We cannot ascertain a statement about the metaphysical world. But does that mean that, well, we have really to reject completely that there is a metaphysical world beyond our own world? That is another question that is usually discussed, and I would like to put it within the the subjective versus objective truth, or subjective versus objective reasoning. Let us now turn to talk about subjective and objective truth. Now, truth is always born in the human subjectivity. It is within us that we can sense the truth. As I said, metaphysical truth cannot be affirmed, rationally. It has to be affirmed internally. It is the human consciousness that drive people to seek divinity, seek God, seek the being that is behind this physical world. This kind of truth is born out through contemplation, analysis, and personal experience. Subjective truth does not drive individual action, but can, I meant to say that individual truth does really drive subjective action or individual action, but cannot be the ground for collective or public action, because it is subjective. To be a ground for public action, it has to become intersubjective. Other human beings must agree to the same conclusions. And in fact, a lot of what we do is based on this intersubjectivity, on the fact that different consciousness can sense or agree on a number of axiomatic principles, as well as on a number of beliefs that drive our collective action. Take, for example, this very simple belief that we seem all to agree that people have equal dignity. This affirmation, this statement really is grounded not in the physical experience, but in the metaphysical affirmation. It is derived from the monotheistic traditions and from the revealed books that Jews, Christians, and Muslims have embraced for centuries, because these books have a grand narrative talking about humanity as being created of a pair of a human being, a man and woman, Adam and Eve. These are the father and mother of humanity. And so, in a way, human beings are brethren. And so they have equal dignity. They are being created by the same God. They are not children of different gods, as pagans and polytheists believe before monotheism came to push away this kind of understanding and affirm the equality of humanity. We believe in that, but there is no empirical evidence. In fact, empirically, we see that people are not equal. Some of them are wealthy, others are poor, sometimes too poor. Some of them are strong, others are weak. Some of them are courageous, hardworking, others are less than that. And so there is a whole array of elements of the empirical reality that could really be used to say, well, okay, after all, what do you mean that people are equal? But we believe people are equal. They have equal dignity, regardless of whether they are wealthy or poor, because this affirmation is born out of faith within the monotheistic tradition. And so the truth about the metaphysical world does not rise to the level of objective truth. It is subjective. And to begin with, it was born initially in the consciousness of prophets who came to their people telling them that these are the truths. But then they become intersubjective. They will never rise, though, to the level of objectivity because of the limitation on human rationality. We have a limited rationality. We don't have an absolute rationality. and therefore our knowledge cannot be absolutely certain. But the best is that based on our intuitive commitment to certain ideas that we feel strongly about them intuitively within us. For this reason, claims about transcendental world, the metaphysical world, is ultimately rooted in grand narratives rather than individual reasoning. These categories of grand narratives and of transcendental statements subsume every transcendental affirmation. So the question becomes, how can we sort out the contradictory claims of various religious narratives? If the truth, with the capital T, if the meaning of existence and the origin and the destiny of existence cannot be ascertained through rational examination or empirical evidence, then how do we, but only by narratives, by different religious communities, how do we know which one is the right one? How can we distinguish between one or the other? Here we come back to the subjective truth, and that makes it very important. The Islamic scriptures, for example, the Qur'an, suggests an interesting criteria for distinguishing truth from falsehood. Let me share with you these two texts, one from the Bible and the other from the Quran. Now, we find the first statement from John 8:32. You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Now, here is a criteria. I would call it here a mystical criteria or pragmatic criteria. So the only way to know about the truth is through its impact on your consciousness. It will set you free. You'll feel sublime. You'll have sublimity. You'll feel less burdened by existence and more motivated to do the things that you believe must be done in life. The Quran gives another criteria. I call it here the criteria of coherence. It says here, and for any examples they bring, of course, talking about the polytheists. For every example they bring to you, we will bring the truth and a better explanation. So this is the, later on now today we talk about the theory of coherence as an important criteria or theory to ascertain the truth. So the criteria I just mentioned, criteria of coherence, the criteria of experience, uplifting experience, they have been suggested by the monotheistic scriptures as the way to deal with, to try to ascertain the truth. Now, if the truth is born internally, why would we then need to talk about external affirmation of the truth? Why do we need to talk about objective truth? Well, definitely this is an important question. And let me say a few words here. On the one hand, it seems clearly that philosophy has, after a long period of time trying to come up with its own version of truth and arguing maybe science will be the basis of transcendental truth, many philosophers, modern philosophers, have given up on this. In fact, we find an increasingly tendency to go to power rather than truth, to say the truth is an illusion and power is all that matters. In fact, this was the argument of Nietzsche in his philosophy, his philosophy about the order of rank and of power. Of course, when you go to power, then you give up equality of people, because that's what Nietzsche have argued about. He said, well, eventually we make our own values. There are no universal values, and those who make values are the powerful, the strong, those who impose their will and organize reality based on their will. And in fact, this is a very dangerous route to take away from the truth and to rely completely on power. We'll come back to the notion of power in subsequent discussions. But for now, let me say a few words about subjective truth. Now, subjective truth does not mean, well, it is an arbitrary truth, because for one reason we have to understand in terms of our own being, how do we relate to the entire existence, our little beings as individuals and particular human beings who live in a particular time and space. How do we relate to the being as the whole reality that seems to be timeless, has no beginning, has no end? At least we cannot really set any beginning or an end. Well, there are a number of claims that have been put out by prophets, by people who have made claims about the meaning of life and the beginning and the end of humanity. These statements must be, of course, examined and looked into. So if reason cannot really give us the full answer, then can we say that religion now is the answer? My response would be yes and no. Religion is, of course, the foundation of all human civilizations. Toynbee in his work, or Spengler before him, and many other historians and philosophers of history, including Hegel and Kant, have realized that the human beings have always relied on a number of axiom principles. These axiomatic principles, these universal principles, are also the ground of religious teachings in their very primordial form, like being good, being honest, being cooperative, taking care of the poor, helping the weak, improving human condition, confronting corruption. Those are the principles that have been behind our evolution as humanity, and therefore we have to take them seriously. And I would like here to, before I make my concluding remarks, to make another suggestion and share with you another slide that also borrow from religious traditions. And these traditions suggest something else as the foundation of truth. It is the universal human values. And so in this verse that can be found in the book of James, this is talking about the truth as being parallel to honesty. Truth and honesty goes together, and honesty also involves ethical acts in the world, caring about the orphan, caring about those who need our help. And so those who advance those principles must be in touch of the truth, or the more deep meaning of life. The Quran makes this interesting statement about the true religion, how to find out which religion is the true religion. Well, the answer here is that it is the religion that confirm human and innate human qualities. And the innate qualities that rational idealists have posited, beginning with the Islamic rationalists. They have always argued that justice and equal dignity and respecting the freedom of others, cooperating toward the goods, these are an innate qualities of human beings because they mimic and mirror the qualities of the divine. In the Quran, the narrative is that before God created the human beings, He informed the angels that He was about to create a vicegerent, a moral agent on earth. And then He told them, when I formed him into shape, molded him into shape, and breathed into him from my own spirit, then bow down to him. And so Islamic rationalists have argued human beings have this divine spark in them. They have this element of the divine spirit that allow them to comprehend the divine, or at least feel the presence of the divine. And so a religion of truth is a religion that call people to act righteously and to help. Any religious tradition or doctrine that push people to be aggressors, to take the property of others, and to kill other human beings with no cause, these would be definitely signs of a religion that has been corrupted and it does not have in it the truth that we can find by looking at the action of those who claim the truth. And so the truth is subjective because the spark of morality and the spark of spirituality is grounded in the human consciousness. And of course, it can be known intersubjectively by others. And that's why we have these religious communities, religious movements. And as long as those movements are pushing toward improving the human conditions and uplifting the human spirit, then these are the traditions and religious traditions that are on the course that's suggested in line with the criteria that we have just suggested. Now, in concluding, I would like, this is really the material that I wanted to share with you. This is how the truth I think can be conceived. I would like to hear from you. What do you think about truth? Are there criteria for the truth other than those? Please share with us, share with me, comment below, and let us engage in conversation, because of course truth for human being evolve through dialogue. The truth, because we are limited to human beings, we cannot comprehend the truth, but our collective knowledge, our accumulated knowledge, and our critical examination of whatever assertions are there around us can help us really grow closer to the objective truth. We will never really comprehend it completely, it looks, because of our limited rationality, but at least we can draw closer to it. I would like to hear what you think, and thank you for watching, and I look forward to see you in future talks on truth and power.